First, Dr. Tony Montebello. Tony's a Senior Vice President with Psychological Associates, a well-authored as well as well-weathered senior consultant. I've been on the golf course quite a bit, and he's going to be main topic. And also Les Muckerman, who's a Senior Instructional Consultant, works primarily, we're actually wearing two hats, both that of research and development as well as working with senior teams and senior executives. So gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We're here to talk about performance management, and how many people in here manage other people? Virtually everyone. Performance management really is a tool to help you direct, manage, motivate, and develop the performance and potential of your people. Unfortunately, in most organizations, we're not fully satisfied with the systems that we have. So today what we're going to discuss are three things. Number one, what are the pitfalls that are common in performance appraisal systems? Secondly, what are some issues and opportunities associated with the forms, the systems, and then secondly, the interaction or the communication process. And I do have to say that Les has to leave about 8:30, so we're going to wrap this up about 8:30 and then take questions between 8:30 and 9. Is that about it? So here's our agenda. Pitfalls, issues, opportunities relative to the forms and to the interaction process itself. And we're going to have a lot of fun because we're going to play consultant today, and we're going to critique some forms and critique some processes and come up with some ideas that hopefully you can take back and apply to your own situations. Some of the pitfalls. Do performance appraisal systems discourage teamwork and collaboration? What do you think? They do? Sometimes? Why is that? It depends on how they're set up. It's okay. Oftentimes, performance appraisal systems encourage individual effort, and you're really competing for scarce resources. The boss's attention, possibly certain amounts of compensation that increases, merit increases. They also foster short-term orientation. Too subjective are complaints. Why are they subjective? Pardon me? Often one person's opinion. It's a subjective process. Basically, it's, we're looking at people's performance and we're making judgments or observations about their performance, and it's not entirely objective. It's my opinion. Too inconsistently applied, and oftentimes autocratic or top-down. Performance appraisal complaints have related to the appraiser simply announcing the appraisee's results at the end of the year. There are other issues. Any other complaints that you hear frequently about performance management systems? Too time-consuming? How do you answer someone who has a complaint about it's too time-consuming? That's right. It's your job. This is your job. Your job is to direct, manage, motivate, and develop the performance and potential of your people. And if you do a good job of that, you're paid to get results through your people, and that's what will happen. The objectives of performance appraisal. There's typically two objectives, maybe three, to facilitate communication. What we want to do here is to make sure people understand what's expected, the expectations, the goals, the results, And we want to make sure that people have feedback on a regular basis about how well they're doing, what progress they're making, what accomplishments they've achieved throughout the appraisal period. Secondly, we need to use performance management systems to make administrative decisions about pay and promotion. So what's the issue up here? See any issue up here? The issue is that these two objectives are in complete conflict. If we want to foster open communication about how you're doing, what's expected, what you've accomplished, and at the same time we want to make decisions about your pay, your promotion, your potential, then these discussions are in complete conflict. How can we have candid discussions about how you're doing when decisions about pay are riding on the discussions? So herein lies the problem and the cause of many of the pitfalls that we mentioned earlier. But keep in mind, these are the two objectives. Number one, communication, and number two, decisions about pay and promotion. I like this diagram because this diagram pretty much sums up what a performance management system is supposed to do for you. It's supposed to make clear what's expected, the target, the performance objectives, the different standards of performance. It's to provide immediate feedback about how you're doing so you can make adjustments. And it's motivational because it allows you to develop and grow. So if you want to be a good manager, I think it all boils down to doing three simple things. Let people know what's expected, let them know how they're doing on a regular basis, and give them opportunities to develop and grow. And a performance management system is a tool to help. But we normally don't share these simple ideas with people because we're consultants and we need to make things very complicated and talk about things like charismatic leadership and situational management so we can charge high fees. But this is all it boils down to. I'd like to ask you to pull out a form. There's a form in behind the slides in your packet, and we'll just play management consultant for a few moments, and let's critique this form. Remember, we have two objectives with performance management. The first objective is to facilitate communication, and the second objective is to make decisions about pay and promotion. How do you like this form? This is the new form that HR sent out. You like it? How many people like it? How would you improve this form? What are some of the issues with this form? Yes? Pardon me? Examples of what? Okay, quality of work. What's that mean? We need examples. We need a definition of what quality really means. Is that ambiguous to you? Okay. How about technical knowledge? Is that ambiguous? So some of these rating factors are ambiguous. What else is an issue with this form? It should have space after each of these rating factors or rating dimensions so that you can provide comments. That would be a good idea. What else can you do to improve this form? I'm sorry? There's nothing measurable in terms of goals or accountabilities. It would be nice to have those. Anything else? Definitions of the ratings. What's strength mean? So imagine if you're in a discussion with an employee, an appraisee, and you've got rating factors that are not well defined, and you've got rating scales that are not well defined. How's that discussion going to go? What's that? Who knows? Probably not very well. And again, we've got a lot riding on this because we've got to make decisions about pay, and we've got to make decisions about development, and we've got to make decisions about promotion potential based upon, you know, a form like this, and it would be very difficult to do so. Let me show you some of the things that we think are important when you're developing a form that will drive a process that will help in managing performance. The first thing that we look at is content. What kind of content do you want included in your form? We think that if you want to describe total performance in your organization or for an individual, it includes what's expected, how we're to operate, the competencies, and how we're going to add value over the course of the year through developmental activities. So this is total performance. The what of performance, the goals and objectives might flow out of the business plans, the strategic plans, into individual accountabilities for results. The how of performance might relate to the values of the organization, the mission of the organization, the competencies that are important to achieve the strategic plan, what's important in terms of competencies to achieve the goals, and development is the development planning portion of your performance management system, and that relates to how you're going to add value. So I think the first decision that you have to make when you're designing a form is which of those content areas do you want to include in the form. Second decision is the timing. Do you want these three components separate in terms of evaluated separately throughout the year? Do you want them evaluated at the same time throughout the year? Thirdly, in terms of ratings for these factors, do you want a behaviorally anchored rating scale? Do you want some sort of frequency scale? You know, what will be the rating scale that will be used to create some metric around each of these content areas? Fourthly, what will be the schedule at which the appraiser and appraisee will have contact? Will it be a year in post-mortem? What's a post-mortem? That's an examination of the dead patient after the patient has died. Will there be a mid-year review of all of these factors or some of these factors? Or will there be a quarterly review or some other frequency? You know, how often do you want the appraiser and appraisee to have contact around the important discussion about how I'm doing, where I'm on target, where I'm off target, what I can do more of, less of, or differently to improve performance? What will be the involvement? Is this going to be a appraiser, top-down, autocratic, I say and you do type of appraisal? Is this going to be a bottom-up? Or is this going to be some joint discussion where both the appraiser and appraisee reach consensus on how they're doing, how we're doing in terms of our goals, our competencies, and our development plans? And then lastly, what decisions will be based upon each of these components? Decisions about pay, development planning, potential. Okay? Any other considerations that you think should be taken into account in the development of forms? Yes. A self-appraisal. You know, if you want the appraisee to be heavily involved in the discussion, you've got to allow them time to prepare for this meeting. So you typically ask them to do a self-appraisal. Randy? $360s? How many people in this room do $360s? And do you include that as part of the appraisal process, or is that for development only? Okay. Okay, Linda does 360s as part of the normal appraisal process. Others do it simply as a developmental tool. Okay, what I'd like to do is switch gears and move away from the form and the process to an actual interaction. And what we're going to do is look at an interaction between a appraiser and appraisee. We've got an annual appraisal here. It happens to be a post-mortem. And we have the appraiser, whose name is Don, doing an appraisal of Jack, the appraisee. What I'd like you to do is two things. Number one,
Come on, Jack, take a chair.
watch Jack
It's that
and
time
his
again. It's
attitude
time to
throughout
check
this
out what you've been
process.
doing this past year.
I'll tell you this, Don. It's
And
been
secondly,
a good
determine
year,
what
one
are
of
the
best my
problems that
area's
have
ever had,
occurred in this
especially
process.
with the market and the economy being down like they are.
Well, that's what we're here to find out. So let's get moving. Let's start with the sales volume. Now, your goal was to increase the area volume by 15%. And we both know how you did on that.
We sure do. I've got the year-end figures right here. My area is up 20%. That's 5% better than the target. It wasn't easy, Don. I mean, I had to push and drive and stay on top of everybody. But it worked. Sales came through to the tune of 20%.
They came through all right, but that's only part of the story, isn't it?
What do you mean, part? 20% is 20%. That is the story.
Not the way I look at the figures. Well, the volume may be up, but look at your expenses. They've zoomed. Now, those extra sales are costing us plenty. So much, in fact, that your gross profit margin is below last year's.
So what, Don? There's nothing in this goal about profit margins, not a word. That's a different subject.
Not to me, it isn't. Now, let's get one thing straight. When I appraise performance, I appraise results. And that means total results. I'm not interested in one little piece of performance. I'm interested in the total result.
I'm interested in total results too, but the fact is that this goal is about sales volume, and that's all we ought to be talking about, sales volume. Profits covered in another goal. It's a different issue.
Profit is not another issue. We can't talk about sales in a vacuum. Anyone with a sense of business knows sales don't mean anything unless they're measured against profit. Anybody can increase sales volume if they ignore profit. So I don't see how you can possibly say profit's another issue. As far as I'm concerned, profit is the issue. You're not saying profits don't count, are you?
Of course I'm not. I'm as concerned about profits as you are. All I'm saying is that profit's a different subject. This goal is about volume, not profit. That's how I understood it when we set it up last year.
It's not how I understood it. I thought it was clear when we set it up, and I still think it's clear. Sales have to be profitable. That's all there's to it. In fact, if you really want to know, I've been worried about your expenses all year.
What do you mean, all year?
I mean, I've been watching your sales expenses creeping up right from the beginning of the year. That's what I mean.
You mean you've been worried about that for months and didn't say anything? Why not?
Because that's not the way I manage. When I give someone a job to do, I expect him to do it without my holding his hand.
Look, if you thought something was wrong, I think we should have gotten together and talked about it.
Look, Jack, I just don't have the time to go around bugging people to do their job. And once the job's assigned, I expect you to do the job and do it right.
Well, I think I deserve to be informed if you're bothered by the way I do things.
This isn't getting us anywhere. Let's get back to the appraisal. Now, your volume's up, I'll agree with that, but your expenses are up too, and your profit margins are down. Now, I want to know why, and I'm not getting any answers. Jack, what's going on in your area?
Okay. If you want to talk about profits, we'll talk about profits. Sure, my profit margin's down a little, that's no secret. But because our volume is way up, the total profit for the area is a lot bigger than it was last year. The figures prove it.
Oh, I have the figures. I know what they say about profit. But that's still not the issue.
Hey, look, you said you wanted to talk about profits.
Yes.
So I'm talking about profits. Now you say that's not the issue. What is the issue?
Jack, you know what the issue is. The issue is that profits would have been even bigger if you hadn't let sales expense jump so high. That's why we wrote the goal in the first place.
That's not the way I understood it. It sure doesn't say that. All it mentions is sales volume. And if it meant something else, it should have said so in plain English. Anyway, I still say if you knew something was wrong months ago, you should have told me about it.
Now look, I really don't need you to tell me what I should and shouldn't do. It's impossible to put everything in writing for every goal. Some things have to be inferred, like sales must be profitable. There wasn't any need to spell that out. Jack, you're an experienced guy. You should have inferred it, okay?
Okay, Don, if you say so.
I do say so. Now, can we finish appraising this goal? We'll never get done if we spend this much time on every goal.
Yeah, sure.
Now, the way I see it, Jack, you should have done better on this thing. And I'll tell you this is not going to happen again next year. Next year, you and all the area managers are going to reduce costs by 10% across the board, and it's non-negotiable. Now, let me tell you what you did wrong this year. Number one, you didn't maintain a tight enough control on these expenses. Look at that. That's obvious from the figures that we have here.
Okay, let's talk about Jack. Jack is the appraisee. What was Jack's attitude when Jack approached the meeting? Pardon me? Positive, enthusiastic, okay. Proud. And then what happened? He was very anxious. He was very excited about talking about his results. He thought he did a great job. And then what happened? What did Don do? What's that? Shot him down. And then what happened with Jack? What impact did that have on Jack? Before he shut down, argumentative. He tried to counter-argue, and they got into a debate, and things became very emotional. And then what happened? What did Don do? He became more combative. And then what happened at the end? Shut down. And what is Don? What is Jack doing as we speak? Updating his resume? Yes. What are some of the issues? What went awry in this interaction? Unclear goals? What else? No feedback? The year-end postmortem? Top down? What else? All negative? No participation. No process unstructured. No preparation, no warning. Anything else? There were a lot of emotional issues that bubbled up that kind of got in the way of the content of the discussion. He was very insulting. He was so in terms of the in terms of the goals of performance appraisal, good communication, good feedback, good development planning, good decisions about pay and potential, all of these issues conspired against those outcomes. And I'm going to turn it over to Les at this point, and we're going to talk about prescriptions, what could be done to improve this process.
Thank you, Tony. Performance appraisal, it's that time of the year when the manager doesn't sleep the night before and the employee doesn't sleep the night afterwards. Okay? Another way to take a look at that is Dilbert gives us some interesting lessons on performance appraisal, and when will my raise be effective? The same time you are. Okay? So that's a sort of a prelude to what we're talking about here. Okay. I don't know where I was on these slides. What number was that? Number 7. Okay, let's go to number 8. Kind of to put things in perspective. Covey has this interesting line. I think you can take it both ways. Often the problem is in the system, not in the people. If you put good people in bad systems, you get bad results, okay? So in terms of Tony's remarks about the system, the process, the procedures, you've got to establish best practices around those particular areas, okay? The system, what is the perception of the organization or the people in the organization in terms of what they perceive a system that benefits them, helps them through the process versus a procedure or a system that they see as punitive or as overcomplicated. And we leave you to kind of make those decisions yourself. We can help you think that issue through. But from a best practices point of view, that previous slide that Tony had up there, that's how you get your systems, your procedures, your philosophy, how you link in your values, and those kinds of things, your mission in that particular part of the process, okay? Well, what I want to share with you, and Bob Lefton's over in the corner here, though many of you know Bob, one of the owners and founders of Psychological Associates. I learned a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, in terms of one of Bob's favorite comments. He says, what do you do when the employee comes in the room and closes the door and you're face to face? Okay? And quite frankly, it's a personal opinion of mine that I think of all the systems of the processes of the procedures of performance management, the most overlooked one is the interaction. We kind of take the interaction for granted, okay? And just think of where you dwell a lot of time on, and a lot of the system stuff and things like that. So what I'd like to do in the time we have available is just to share with you 5 best practices from a goal-setting interactional point of view. Okay, and it's in the material that you've got in front of you. First of all, we've got, from a performance management point of view, our focus in many instances is the interaction. And we take a look at that in the context of the organization, the manager, and the employee all have expectations, okay? There's a period of performance in which feedback should be given, which leads to results, the absence of or the inclusion of, okay? And so that's kind of the flow that we take a look at from a performance management point of view, especially when it comes to the interaction. And so let's be a bit more specific about that. This might oversimplify the performance management issue, but really when you come down to it, there's 4 reasons why performance is what it is. The first reason, essentially, is the clarity of the goals or the standards. as somebody mentioned, one of the big downsides to the Don Jack situation was a very unclear perception of what the goals were, okay? They were singing off different pages of music in terms of what they thought the goals were, okay? And so performance, I think, is going to be enhanced with very clear, specific kinds of goals. It's going to be minimized, and you're going to have a lot of problems in the interaction when there's a lot of vagaries associated with what the expectations might be. Okay? What did the subordinate do, or what should the direct report do? So you can talk in past tense or future tense here. Okay? So what did they do? Okay, yeah, you've seen a lot of direct reports who went ahead of schedule, ahead of goal, but didn't do anything to get there. You know, you've seen people just work night and day and still not get there. Okay? So you got to take a look at what happened there, and in some instances there's some contingencies that you've got to take into account for. Okay? What did you as the manager do? You've got a stake in this game as well. And so as a result of that, what was your role in the process in terms of facilitating this particular employee's performance? What's your role in the feedback? You're kind of managing the process in some areas, in some instances. So what did you do? And finally, contingencies, okay? You know, competition comes into your market and cuts prices by 30%. Maybe you anticipated that, maybe you didn't anticipate that, okay? Acts of God, okay? But what's the problem with contingencies, though? What's the issue around contingencies? Okay? That's the first place people go in terms of trying to justify performance, okay? Is, you know, well, I didn't get the kind of support I needed. Well, you know, as we got closer to the year, the economy kind of went soft on us in various markets, and so it was really kind of impossible to get that particular goal, kind of a thing. So you really got to watch. Contingencies are a legitimate reason why performance is what it is, but you've got to really look very closely at those, okay? So based on that, then, these are the kinds of things both the employee and the manager need to know when they go into this whole issue of performance management, okay? And a lot of the things that Tony's talked about, too. Where's the organization going? What's its mission? What's its direction? What are its goals, okay? Same with the department, the unit, whatever it might be. What are their goals, okay? And in many instances, if you're managing a business unit, your business unit goals in many instances obviously are yours, and you might have some personal goals attached to that, okay? I think it's very helpful in many instances to let employees know what you're getting measured on, okay? Now that might be very obvious. It might not be so obvious. The newer the employee, the more you might need to help them understand what you're being held accountable for, okay? What's the direct report? Where are they coming from? What are their abilities, their skills, their interests, their needs? Those kinds of things are very critical in terms of having an effective interaction and having an effective system, okay? What does the job require? What are the competencies that we're looking at, okay? So that's an important thing to keep in mind, okay? So all that is kind of a setup in terms of trying to deal with the first issue of why performance is what it is, which is the clarity of goals. And so a lot of you have seen this stuff before, and it's old news to you, but just as to refresh your memory, we strongly feel that there's a nice little paradigm out there that helps you with the goal construction process. And so we've got start with an action, apply to an object with some kind of a desired result over a specific time frame, and if appropriate, with limiting conditions. So an example of that would be reduce advertising costs of widgets by 7% this year without losing market share. Now we could stop that goal at this year, okay? We could just write a goal in this particular situation that said reduce advertising costs of widgets by 7% this year. What's the value of adding limiting conditions? Okay, it provides more clarity. What else? Sorry? Direction. Anything else? Okay, in what way? Right. Right, okay. Or in some ways it could protect the long term as well, okay? So it covers, it's broader yet specific, okay, kind of talking out of both sides of our mouths, yeah. Well, I think maybe I think part of where you're going is maybe there's another goal out there, okay? I don't know. I'd have to know the content of the situation. My tendency says market share probably is, but I think that's where you want to go. Okay. So I think you have to sort that one out in terms of the value. But it could beg another goal. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Give me 2 minutes. Okay. Okay. The point here is that the limiting conditions feature, I think, is an important thing to consider in terms of goal construction. It just adds as a protection, as Jeannie says, and things like that, and it gives you a much tighter look at what you're trying to get accomplished. I think you have to have a discussion about that when you're dealing with the direct report. Now we come back to your particular point here, where another takeaway is the measurability issue. And everybody's heard about SMART, okay? I think back to your point, there's two things I want to talk about on this particular slide. SMART's a good acronym to keep in mind in terms of goal construction. But there's a little thing in here called dates, percentages, numbers, documentations. There's really two types of metrics that we've got available to us. Really, I'm oversimplifying it here. Numeric and descriptive, okay? Numeric is dates, percentages, numbers, and documentation. Descriptive is what the judge is looking for, okay? So let's say you are the receptionist's boss. You are the judge of the performance. You, in your own mind, describe the behaviors that constitute professional receptionist. She or he needs to know that you are the judge, and that's what their performance is being measured against, okay? Advertising is constantly considered one of those, oh, I can't measure this, okay? We can't measure this, okay? Well, let's say you're responsible for putting ad copy together, and who's the judge? The senior VP of marketing. When he signs off, that means that he has said, this does what I want it to do in terms of presenting the image of this organization to the buying public. That's how you try to get your hands around the descriptive issue of establishing metrics versus the numeric. Okay? Somebody once said, you don't have to measure everything, but everything has to be measurable. Okay? You always have to ask yourself, what does it cost me to measure this? And there are times when you get diminishing return in terms of what the cost of measurement is, in terms of what its value is. Okay? So you got to keep that in mind too. So does that help in terms of the issue of the receptionist? Okay. Consider the judge. This guy by the name of Tom Ligdon or something, if you need his name, we'll get it for you. But he's done excellent work in terms of this whole measurement issue. Really good stuff. And part of his word here is the judge. The second part of his word is this issue of subjectivity, and we got it over here in attainability. Don't lose a lot of sleep over subjectivity, folks. Lose sleep over the absence or the presence of verifiability, okay? The issue isn't subjectivity. The issue is, can I verify that it happened? Okay? There's always going to be subjectivity associated with the kinds of standards you put together, the outcomes you're expecting, and things like that. That's not the problem. The problem is, can we verify it? And then that kind of salves the issue around subjectivity, okay? It is a subjective kind of a thing. Okay, so those are the two issues on SMART that I wanted to bring out. Okay. Action plans is another takeaway. One of the things we see, first of all, organizations that do good jobs in performance management have pretty good goal-setting systems, but also they are very attuned to reasonable metrics. Okay, they're not outlandish in terms of their expectations. My bias is that you all aren't too bad at that. My experience is the goal-setting process in terms of putting goals together isn't that difficult. What's difficult is getting agreement on what it's that interaction that takes place between you and your boss or you and your direct report. That's where the difficulty comes in terms of it ought to be 9%, it ought to be 7%, okay? Coming up with 9% or 7% generally isn't a big issue, okay? So action plans also is something that we think is best practice, is that there's a conscious effort of putting good action plans together. Now we come back to our 4 simplistic reasons as why performance is what it is. And one of the things that you want to do is put action plans together that describe what the employee must do to make this happen, to describe what the manager must do to make this happen, and to identify potential contingencies. You know, if we can think of, you're not going to think of them all, but what if kind of scenarios, okay? So that's what you want to keep in mind as you work through that. Your style, like you saw in Don, your style has a lot to do with this whole process. And many of you are familiar with the dimensional model, and I'm just going to quickly give you a perspective of the dimensional model in terms of what appraiser behavior looks like. We start with the whole issue of direct, indirect, submissive, dominant behavior. So you got that vertical axis of people being more dominant or more submissive, coupled with the horizontal axis of people being more hostile to warm, okay? So you come up with 4 quadrants or 4 patterns of behavior in terms of the appraisor. And the first one, as you can see coming up, is Q1 behavior. And this is a good example of Don. Dictates the goals, top-down communications, and destructive feedback, okay? So that's one style of manager that you see. Another style you might see in terms of Q2, which is vague, minimal communication, and feedback is avoided. Q3, which is easy or vague goals, there's a rambling, meandering communications process, and feedback is overly positive. A very, very, I don't know if I want to use the word destructive, but it is very misleading kind of managerial style when it comes to performance management. And then we're going to essentially say that Q4 goals, Q4 behavior from an appraising manager is going to be mutually set, and take mutual. The attempt is going to be mutual. I don't want you leaving here saying that Q4s will not settle in on a goal unless there is mutual consent. That's not true. But Q4 behavior will make every attempt at mutuality in terms of the goal setting and the performance management process. Sometimes you have to exercise direction and do what you're supposed to do as a manager. So Q4 is not going to wait all the time, but they're going to give the direct report every opportunity to participate until something has to happen. So your style is a best practice in terms of how to go about this particular process. And consistency in terms of how you communicate. Consistency about a sequence. In many of your jobs, just think about it for a minute, there is a sequence in many instances in terms of certain things have to happen before other things. We believe the same thing is true with performance management, okay, and with the process of discussion, that you need a consistent format, a sequence in terms of how to do things, okay? And first of all, you want to open up the discussion. I'll say a quick word about each of these, give your views, resolve disagreements, and develop an action plan. Now, you've got 5 steps in more detail in your material, and let me just quickly go over those. The opening is important because, as you see on the next slide, the whole issue of the employee has to understand what's in it for them to go through this particular process. And the employee has to understand what's in it for them to participate in a performance management process per se. Okay? So the whole notion of helping them understand how they're better off in terms of going through these kinds of exercise is a very crucial step in terms of getting the commitment that you're looking for to do things, to get things done and things like that. So the opening of how, see, in many instances you go into these discussions with 2 strikes against you, okay? Because performance isn't very good and it's a struggle to work interactionally with these particular people. So it will serve you very well from a best practices point of view to make sure that both parties understand the value of the process and the value of going through this particular activity. It is not something that the HR department is dictating. It's something that we think is just best practice. Get the other person's point of view first for obvious reasons. Get their point of view in terms of what the goal should be. Get their point of view in terms of how they perform the goal. get their point of view in terms of what the action plans ought to be, okay? Give your views. Make sure that where you agree, let them know that. Where you disagree, let them know that as well. Resolve. Try to come to some resolution. Try to come to some conclusions about performance. See, a lot has to do whether we're talking down the future, which is goal setting, or whether we're talking present and past, which is essentially progress reviews and the annual appraisal. Or any coaching session that you might find yourself in, okay? Any coaching session, counseling session, is just as much of a performance management discussion as sitting down and talking about goals and plans and things like that. And so the same thing applies in that context. So during step 4, you want to try to come to conclusions about the goal, about the contribution, about the action plans. Or you may want to come to conclusions about what should we do next, kind of thing. So in step 5, depending upon the process that you're in, goal setting or performance review is going to be a function of either dotting the I's and crossing the T's or being more definitive about the specific action plans that one needs in order to complete an agreed upon goal. So those are quick looks. Bear with me here. In a closing, I don't know if you can see this, probably you can't. Relying on his vast CD collection, manager Walt Throbosky liked to provide an appropriate soundtrack when he gave performance reviews. You're no good, you're no good, baby, you're no good. Okay. And Tony's going to wrap this up. 24. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Les. In conclusion, what we're recommending in terms of prescriptions is that you meld the culture, the values, your performance management system, the procedures that you use to support open communication and feedback. Establish a culture, if you will, that is developmental. It's a culture based upon open feedback, open communication, and ongoing development. Secondly, we recommend that you define behavioral competencies, specific behaviors that are observable, that take the rater out of the role of a judge and put the rater in the role of an observer of behavior, to support your organizational values and how you want to position your organization vis-a-vis the competition to be the competitive edge. Product competitiveness is short-lived. Behavioral competitiveness, how you operate toward your customers, the bedside manner that you show is something that's not easily copied. It's more sustainable. Thirdly, cascade goals from a strategic or business planning process into individual accountabilities for results. Let people know what their contribution is to the strategic and business plans, ensuring they're measurable. Promote ongoing development, ensure that everyone adds value to the organization each year. Provide developmental goals or action plans. Ensure that people continually grow and develop. And then lastly, foster ongoing and candid discussion about performance plans, how we're doing against those plans, what our progress and accomplishments are. Use the skills, the 5-step format, and the other skills to enable more Q4 behavior. What questions do you have about anything that we've discussed thus far? Yes. Number 2. Many organizations have what they might consider values, what they want to stand for as they carry out their business. You know, it may be bedside manner, customer satisfaction, friendliness. And secondly, many organizations want to position themselves against the competition to stand out, to create some sort of a competitive advantage. It may or, a behavioral competency may or may not be innate to their personality. You know, I may not be by nature someone that shows a lot of empathy for customers, but when the organization selects me and clarifies the expectations that they have for me, I have to buy into the fact that I have to go above and beyond the call of duty to serve customers. What the organization owes me is what does that mean in behavioral terms, so that I can adapt my behavior to fit with what the organization wants to stand for vis-a-vis its customers. Does that make sense? Okay. The other key point here is behavioral. You know, we want to stay out of the trait trap. You know, shows good judgment. I think that's a trait. What is judgment? What is good judgment? We want to define things in behavioral terms. Brian? Absolutely. You know, we want to use these criteria to select people that have a good fit with the culture, the expectations, and then once we get them on board, we want to do everything we can to ensure that they understand what's expected and how they're doing. And that's where selection is the beginning component, and then performance management follows up on that. But we want to get as close a match as we can through the selection process in terms of identifying people that can perform the expectations that we have for them. Linda, you had a question? Comment? So you've broadened performance to include not only service to external customers, but also collaboration among the team members. And what we've seen in many organizations is that if you want good service to external customers, you've got to have a climate of service that's internal. To use the term friendly, if there's a friendly climate, if the boss creates a climate of friendliness and open communication and mutual support, then the people are going to pass that along to the external customers. Other questions, comments? sly remarks? Okay, are we ready for a drawing? Okay. Thank you very much.